and welcome. My name is Forrest Longman, and I'm the current president of City Club. The mission of City Club is to inform, connect, and engage our community to strengthen the civic health of our region. We emphasize civil conversations and listening to others. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people, and it has been this way since time immemorial. As always, I'd like to thank all of our volunteers who make our programs possible. First, I'd like to thank KMRE radio board member Robert Clark, who's producing today's program, and BTV10, who will be broadcasting it to their viewers. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for their support. They are Larson Gross, Lemmy Commercial Company, Danny Neal of the Mulyat Group, the Opportunity Council, Pacific Continental Realty, Unity Care Northwest, Village Books, Western Washington University, Whatcom Community College, Whatcom Community Foundation, and Bruce and Claudia Dysand. There'll be no City Club program in December. We welcome your questions today. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box and hit enter. Finally, I'd like to turn things over to Christine Perkins. Christine is the Executive Director of the Whatcom County Library System and a member of the City Club Program Committee. She'll introduce today's program and moderate. Thanks.
Super. Thank you very much, Forrest. I'm so happy to see the sun out today and to be with you for this timely presentation. There's nothing like a major emergency, like a record-breaking flood, to remind us all how important it is to have access to accurate, detailed local news. News junkies like me know that there are multiple resources for news in Whatcom County. There's the Bellingham Herald, our local weeklies like the Linden Tribune, Ferndale Record, Point Roberts Press, and Northern Light, as well as Whatcom Watch and online news sources like Whatcom News, Northwest Citizen, and others. There's also Cascadia Weekly, which has been around for more than 15 years. So full disclosure, I am a lifelong subscriber to the Bellingham Herald. I have donated to the Salish Current, and our library system has purchased ads in almost all of those news outlets. Today, we welcome two veteran journalists to speak about two new news organizations to enter the local media scene. Amy Nelson is the publisher and digital editor of Salish Current, which builds itself as a nonpartisan, nonprofit online local news organization serving Whatcom, San Juan, and Skagit counties. Ron Judd is the executive editor of Cascadia Daily News, an online daily newspaper that will begin publication January 1 of 2022. We've got a lot of questions for both of you. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump right in. I'm going to start with Amy. Will you please tell us a little about the Salish Current?
Absolutely. And first of all, just delighted to be here for a couple of reasons. And one of them is that the City Club is just packed with news nerds, as you say, and we've appreciated their support from the very beginning of our sort of wild endeavor, untried adventure. Salish Current has been publishing for about 20 months, so we're very new still. We organized as a nonprofit after probably a year and a half of vetting the idea with journalists, journalism professors, people in City Clubs, people in other areas, reaching out into groups who we didn't know anybody in, just to get a sense for what people might be missing. And it turns out that everyone felt like there were gaps to be filled. So we have set out to do that. We're, as I said, a nonprofit. We have a board of directors who include, in addition to me, Jill Bernstein, Bill Dietrich, Matthew Tooney, and Cheryl Crooks. And you probably, most of you will find those names to be very familiar because they're people who are very active in communities, and it's just really delightful to work with them. So the other part of us, when I keep talking about us, is our freelancers who provide the content. We typically have 8 or 9 we're working with at any given time, working on various stories. And then the editorial crew, which are me and My husband, Mike Sato, I happen to be married to exactly the right person for this endeavor, because as well as a journalism experience, Mike has nonprofit and fundraising experience too. And we also enjoy the expertise of Lane Morgan, who is a longtime journalist and journalism instructor, and one of the most brilliant editors who I've worked with. So it's a delightful group of people. We have a cast of more community advisors who are just incredibly helpful as well. So that is us. And when you dial back and you think about, oh, you have 3 volunteer editors, we all wear a lot of hats. So I kind of grin over the titles I have chosen today: publisher and digital editor. Yes, those are true. Others are true as well. We focus on, as one of our board members put it quite tidily, what it's like to live here. We write about social justice issues, climate planning, climate crisis, quality of life kinds of things. Water rights has been a really big area, as some other commercial things. Agriculture is something that we're interested in looking at too. And our goal with this is to inform the community. We're deeply committed to the idea and the experience that communities that have vibrant local news are more apt to have a stronger democratic process and be more connected. So that is a goal that we share, certainly with City Club and many other people and organizations in the area.
Great. So just briefly, what is the business model for Salish Current? You mentioned your nonprofit. So how do you get the funds you need to keep going?
Well, think NPR. It's very much like that. Right now, we're in the middle of a Newsmatch fundraising campaign. So everybody who's on our list is going to hear from us about, support us if you can. The organization is really committed to free news. Anyone can access the news on our platform. People who can afford to pay for it so that everybody gets the information. So we have had some very generous grants from the Whatcom Community Foundation for starting up. We've had donations from $5 to thousands of dollars from various people. And that is looking like it's going to be a viable model for now. Who knows where the whole business of local news is going as a business model, but for right now, this should work for us. And we feel like it's complementary. We weren't out to take anything away from any other news organizations already existing, but to add.
And do you have a particular target readership in mind for the Salish Current?
Well, everybody who can read, I guess. But truthfully, I think that people who are really love the community, want to live here, want to know what it's, what the issues are. We have started out, I think, with probably an audience that is very close to city clubs and expanded from there. We have a couple of ideas for programs that would help us connect with the 15 to 25-year-old cohort. That could be pretty exciting. So really everybody who lives here is who we'd like to reach.
Great. So Ron, turning to you on Cascadia Daily News, your website is announcing a January 1 launch. Are you on track to do this? And what plans do you have in store for Cascadia Daily News?
I'd say we are on track for a January launch. January 1st is a holiday, so I'll probably take that day off. But yes, we're hoping to launch in early January with an online daily news site and a weekly print edition, which I think is important to our effort, not only because it carries advertising from local businesses, but because it carries on the tradition of a more traditional newspaper. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. We share the same kind of goals that Amy does in being a civic meeting place, and the City Club does also. And I think there shouldn't be one of those, but there should be many. And I'm really encouraged to see the growth of efforts to maintain this in our community. I mean, it's been really super encouraging to hear from people since we announced what we're doing. A lot of people have come to us and say, we still see gaps here. And I think the gap that they're trying to point to and that we're trying to fill is more of the traditional hometown newspaper gap, sort of the paper of record, where we cover local government, we cover sports, we cover arts and entertainment. We put out a wide variety of things. And critically, I think for us, being an active editorial voice in the community, I feel like that's been missing here for a long time. I've lived in Bellingham for 20 years. And I believe that's a big missing part of the local news equation, is not only accountability journalism, but someone to drive home those points editorially. And we hope to provide a platform for that with different voices from all over the place, not just mine from a column, but from other people in the community. We are I guess, a for-profit enterprise because we're privately owned. We don't, I can assure you that our owner has no illusions of making a lot of money off of this product. The goal is to get people to come along with us and become subscriber members and help us get to the point where we can be sustainable. We have some seed money here that is a really incredibly unusual thing for a community our size in America. I don't know many other places where this is going on today, where a local person has stepped up and said, I see a community problem here of not having enough active enterprise journalism that gets to the soul of our community. And here's some money, go fix it, fix this problem. So that's what we're trying to do. We've hired a staff of, I think we're gonna, in early December, be up to 9 people in the newsroom, maybe 12, depending on our flow of interns at the moment. 3 business people. So we're a local business trying to fulfill the role, the traditional American role of privately owned news operations, providing public service journalism. And that model has broken down in a lot of places. And it's largely because I think of the people who have become the owners of these private operations. I think the model itself is proven. Whether it can become a sustainable thing in a community our size with a combination of funding sources from advertising, from member subscriptions is probably our biggest, what we anticipate is our biggest source of revenue. It's an experiment. And we think if it can succeed anywhere, it can succeed here, because as the things that we've just heard about of all of the local news efforts that have arisen here in response to what I think everybody acknowledges as kind of a news vacuum caused by the local paper being owned by a succession of chain owners, which haven't been great for journalism, but now a chain owned by a hedge fund, the worst possible combination. So I think there's broad acknowledgement of that problem, and we see ourselves hopefully as part of the solution to that in combination with all of these other efforts, which are all worthy.
Great. Okay. So Amy, Salish Current seems to have a broader geographic scope beyond Bellingham or Whatcom County. Why did you choose the areas that you did, and what does that mean for readers?
Oh, part of it has to do with the 40th Legislative District, which was an area of coverage that we, when we did our scan, found was very light. So we looked at Skagit and San Juan and found that there's a lot that fits. I actually read a history article recently that said that San Juan County used to be part of Whatcom County, which I thought was fascinating, but it does speak to how closely linked many people's lives are. If you are in the San Juans and you need medical care that's not available there, you probably will end up at Peace Health in Bellingham or at a hospital in Anacortes or Mount Vernon. And the school systems, once kids graduate from high school, they often gravitate to the community colleges and the university in this area. And also economically, the commerce flows that way. So it felt like a really natural inclusion for us.
Okay. Ron, will Cascadia Daily News look at all of Cascadia, or is the focus mostly on Bellingham and Whatcom County? And
no, absolutely. As our name implies, Cascadia is the tradition that we're growing from, covering the region, the northwest corner. We definitely plan to, we have the sort of the same coverage area actually in mind. We'll start with a more intense focus on local Bellingham news because we see that as the center of the vortex of the news vacuum, but with a keen eye from the very beginning of covering the region. And we have organized our news beats on more of a regional basis than specific topics in some ways. And we plan to have some working correspondence in both of the other two counties. So we do see that as a big part of our mission. And as we grow, we hope to make that an increasing part of our mission. But there are obvious connections between all of the different municipalities and counties in this corner of the state. You know, we're all connected by the same industries, as Amy said, and especially environmental issues, transportation issues. All of those things we hold in common. I don't define our coverage area by a legislative district because I challenge any non-wonk political person to draw their legislative district on a map. We hope to educate people about legislative issues and politics that affect the region, but we're more based on just the broad area and hoping to start out covering the broad area with more intense focus on the outer parts of it as we move along is our goal.
Okay. Back to Amy. Salish Current has been in operation for, you said, I think 19 months now. How would you say it's going so far, and what challenges are you facing?
It's going very well. We continue to get new subscribers and new donors, and we're very pleased with the response in that regard. It's there's actually, in terms of what it's like for our editors and our freelancers, there's really nothing in the way of work that I've ever found that's more fun than community journalism. So there's a very, very high level of motivation. I guess one of our bigger challenges is that sometimes our very talented freelancers move on to other places, which is great. It's really good. We actually are working with Western Washington University's journalism department in an internship program, and I think, Ron, you mentioned interns as well. Mm-hmm. So that's really a big benefit of being in this particular area. The challenges, of course, we started from zero, and I think are getting word out about who we are. And I was really delighted to see somebody had put our URL in the chat. So if anyone watching hasn't seen it, the URL is there, and you can go check us out. But that visibility factor is one that we'll keep pushing at and work on.
Okay. So Ron, projecting ahead, what do you anticipate the biggest challenges will be for Cascadia Daily News?
I think, we're brand new also, and we're really new. We haven't even started publishing yet. Name familiarity is going to be a big push that we'll make early on. We'll do some advertising to help people realize who we are and what we're doing. We plan to be intensely involved in community activities like this one. One thing that will make us stand out from the current daily newspaper is that we will be in these kind of rooms, hopefully in physical rooms soon, all the time. That's part of my job, is to be the face of our publication and show that we see this as a local product, a local business, but a local newspaper. And we want it to be continually pushing towards a two-way conversation with our readership and reaching out to them and asking them to show us what they want to read, what they want to see. We have a different approach here from a nonprofit, and I think they're both very valid ways to solve a problem. The nonprofit model is to build and grow subscribers and keep building. Our model is to, like I said, we've been fortunate enough to get some seed money to come out with what we hope will be a really professional product, staffed by professional journalists who are making living wages and living in Bellingham, in a place that they love and care about, and working to put something out that will get noticed right away because it's different, right? I mean, it's something that's been missing here for a long time, I think, as a longtime resident. And I hope that people will notice that this is a paper that's actually based here. They work here. Their decisions are made here. The editorial decisions at our newspaper are made at my desk, and my desk is on State Street, not Wall Street. And I think that's the message we want to get out to people. And we've already heard from a lot of people without even seeing a product saying, yes, we want this. And that's just so encouraging. Our staff is about 2/3 of our staff is already at work. And one of my hardest jobs in the last month or so, especially this week, has been to tell people, slow down, you're not working yet, we can't publish this. Like instinctively, everybody went out to cover the flood the other day. And that was really heartwarming for me as a veteran journalist to see that instinct was there, and that we've hired a lot of the right people because they care about covering the community already. And I think that people will see that once we start publishing. So that's a challenge, is to just let people know who we are. We have all sorts of organizational challenges. We found really interesting things where we've called people up and asked for certain services or supplies, and they've said, you're starting a what? You're starting a newspaper? Like, who does that? And that's a good question. And we're doing it because we think it's going to work. And it kind of defies a lot of industry business logic, but the industry business logic has basically failed the people here for a long time. So we're taking a chance on something, and we hope that the community will rally behind it and make it their own newspaper that gives them their own voice.
So just to clear up a little confusion, what is the relationship, or if any, with Cascadia Weekly, a name that we're familiar with?
Good question. Cascadia Weekly is, like you said, has a 15-year tradition here of being an independent voice. Cascadia Weekly will cease to publish when our newspaper comes out, and we will incorporate most of what's in Cascadia Weekly, except for some parts, into our new daily operation. And it will take the place and greatly expand on what Cascadia Weekly has always provided here in the community, which has been a very valuable service for a long time, and grow from there.
And will you be located in the former Cascadia Weekly office, or have you got new digs for the?
We have new digs, and we're going to be located on State Street in the PSE building. And we have a brand new newsroom built there that is waiting on city inspection. No pressure, city inspectors, for us to occupy. We're ready to move in there, hopefully next week. And that's where we will be based. Our print edition of our paper will be printed at the Skagit Valley Herald. And our newsroom will operate, though, out of the State Street newsroom, which is brand new.
Got it. Okay, Amy. I'm curious about how you're measuring and success for Salish Current. It seems like with online articles, it's easy to measure clicks and maybe even length of time people are spending reading various articles and other data. You could maybe track unique readers. So what are the measurements that you're using to tell if Salish Current is meeting its audience, reaching its audience?
We look at different kinds of things for the different sorts of publications we're doing. You can, yes, with your website, look at clicks, and clicks can tell all kinds of stories. It's sometimes it's really a lot more important who's clicking than how many are clicking. I think that's a lesson people learn early on, looking at Google Analytics and other sorts of forms like that. One of the most helpful things for story planning is which articles get the most clicks. And there's a really clear pattern. The kinds of stories that we set out to do that we thought would be really important do turn up to be really important. I mentioned things about water rights and water supply. Those peg out the top of the meter every time. Stories about communities, like we did a story about Sumas and we did a story about Lummi Island, that both were extremely popular with our readers. We do also a weekly newsletter, which is a really important part of our publication. It includes links to our week's stories, along with a curated list of links to other publications' news of the week. And that really grows nearly every day there is somebody saying, hey, sign me up for that newsletter. It's very, very popular. And for that, it really is the number of subscribers and open rates and things of, numbers like that show up on the email reports. Another way to judge your success in the news business is you can tell if anybody's reading by how many people write back to you in terms of letters to the editor. We also have the Community Voices column, which has been quite popular and really has some very provocative and very useful information in it. So for each of our 3 different sorts of faces that we have, there are different metrics.
Gotcha. So just for people who haven't yet visited the Salish Current website, trying to explain the experience. You can check in daily or whenever it suits your fancy to go to the website and access the articles for free. All audience can do that. If you choose, you can choose to be a supporter and send in a donation to the site. You can choose to get the weekly email update sent to you so that it keeps it top of mind that you want to check in on the Salish Current. Is that kind of how you envision people using that resource that you put together?
Yes, that's right. Exactly. You nailed it.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure I've got it straight for everybody. And Ron, from your perspective, Cascadia Daily News will be having a daily edition, or is it just articles kind of compiling on a website and then they'll come together some kind of summary in the weekly version, or will the weekly part be kind of a whole separate thing?
Yeah, we are developing that plan now, but our vision is to have a constantly updated website that's a real live website that doesn't refrain from posting things after 5 o'clock in the evening. When news happens, it'll be online, and it'll be always updated and live. Much of the material from that website, not all of it, of course, because of space, will go into the weekly print edition. We may actually use the weekly print edition for unique content also that doesn't appear online until after it's in the print edition, because we can make better use of photos and graphics and other kind of more attractive display options. We are employing 2 professional photographers who are making great images for us, and we see our visual nature as a big part of what will sell our newspaper and our product, because people respond to imagery, they respond to video, they respond to good graphics, and those are expensive to produce. And we're investing in that because we think that creates a product that people will want to come back to. A good portion of the news material that's on our website will be available for free without a subscription. All of it will be initially as we sort of roll out our subscription plan. Our initial subscription plan, which will be announced soon on cascadiadaily.com, will combine a mailed edition of the print paper to your house with unlimited access to our website when that digital subscription plan is implemented sometime later this coming year.
Okay. So one of the concerns for readers, I guess, would be that there is an incentive to get people to click on your stories, right? So creating tantalizing headlines that people just can't resist, and even focusing on specific stories that might be considered clickbait or scandalous in some way. Does that concern you? Does that part of the game, or is that something that you have a plan to avoid or protect against in some way? And I'll start with Ron on that.
It doesn't concern me as much as it makes me appalled. The headlines in our local daily paper, and this I'm sure is a McClatchy chain thing, have become a standing joke in the industry. And you'll know the clickbait headline when you see the word "this." Like last week, there was actually a headline that says, "This portion of the Nooksack River may flood." That's not what we're about, playing news Jeopardy games here. We will track clicks on stories as an advisory thing. It is not our profit center. We have no interest in tricking people or making them click on a story to find out what the information is. We are here to provide that information. People pay for that information. they should get it presented to them in the easiest digestible way possible without having to play whack-a-mole through numerous screens. And we won't do that. It's just part of the essence of who we are. We're not going to do clickbait headlines. We're not going to have unmoderated comment sections where people ramble on and on and on forever with their own commentary. We're not going to have bait and switch subscription models where we sign you up for $1 for 3 months and then keep charging your credit card for month after month after month. These are all things that we hear from people that they don't want. So part of our plan for what we are going to be is based on what people have said they don't like about existing news business models. And number one in my mind on that list is the clickbait headline, because it doesn't serve the purpose of journalism, which is to impart information in a practical, contextual, easy way. And we're not going to make people work to find out what part of the river is going to flood. We're going to tell them directly in a headline and expand on that in a story, maybe have some video. We're going to lay out the news as people want it. And, you know, I don't want to come across as criticizing reporters at the local daily. I think they did a great job covering the flood this week, honestly. But newspaper chains have these rules, and the rules are literally, if something doesn't create 756 clicks a week, that's the line that some genius has set at the corporate headquarters, it's out, right? We're not about that. We're more patient. We plan to be patient with content and put out things that we think are important to the community, even if they don't generate huge numbers of clicks, because they're important. And we can't base everything on popularity. News and the civic agenda is not a popularity contest. And I think when it is, you get into dangerous territory.
Thank you. Amy, what are your sentiments on this topic? And are there anything in policy or practice at Salish Current that speaks to this idea of clickbait and I guess stirring things up in order to get more readership?
I think it's a really frustrating experience to look at a headline and have like a half a kernel of information that you think might be interesting, and then you click and it isn't. So we have no desire to frustrate readers, and because it is free content, there's nothing to gain by that either. The best thing that we can do is to give the reader enough information so that they can figure out whether they really want to see the story and get some satisfaction out of reading it along with that information. I also want to echo Ron's comment about the work that the reporters at the Bellingham Herald do. I think they work really hard, and I've seen more enterprise type stories out of their work in the last year, which makes me very happy for them, because they are good journalists.
Absolutely. And both of you have mentioned that term enterprise journalism. So for those of us not in the business, could you give a little explanation of what that means to you, Amy?
It's essentially doing your own reporting, not using the press release, for example, to write from. Press releases are wonderful and very informative, and having written thousands of them myself, I know that they're also only part of the story, and you need to, as a reporter who really wants to give the community good information in context, you've got to go farther than that.
Gotcha. Anything to add about that, Ron?
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think, to me, enterprise is the non-obvious news story, right? It's what lies beyond what's happening on the immediate surface. A good example might be, I think last year we were talking about the Herald, and it's the newspaper in the room. I don't mean to pick on them, but I think they did a great job of covering the pandemic numbers, right? Just like, here's what's going on with the pandemic in our community. To me, an enterprise treatment of that story is to look beyond the numbers and look at other underlying issues that the story should bring up, like how has the county's response and the public health system's response to this thing worked? What about our hospital system? What has it showed us about the way that our one major healthcare provider here treats healthcare. What have we learned about that and the viability of that system in relation to a public health threat like a pandemic? These kind of things that take a lot of extra time and a lot of extra reporting. And that's why it's not often done in communities our size, because, and I see the Current doing some of that. We plan to do a lot of that. And that's what's going to make us stand out, I think, from the products that have been around here for a long time. And I see attempts to do that all over the place. And we have a really active, like you mentioned in the introduction, a really active citizen journalism community here. And I say, God bless those people. They've been trying to do a lot of this work for a long time. And that shows to me that people do care and there's an audience for that kind of work. And some of it's just, though, really expensive, and it requires people spending weeks at a time working on one story, and that costs money. And that's something that we hope to be able to do right from the get-go. And I think and hope that people will respond to that.
Gotcha. So Amy, I want to circle back to the Salish Current and the team that's working on it. You mentioned that your editorial folks are volunteers and that you are working with a lot of freelancers. And I'm curious if those are paid freelancers or if they're volunteering, they're writing, what kind of credentials they have, and how many people are submitting articles to you?
The reporters are all paid. Yes, that's where our money goes right now, is to get content produced by professional writers. They all have journalism backgrounds, and some have worked elsewhere. All of them have journalism degrees, and all of them are really passionate about wanting to do journalism. Journalism is it's an interesting profession. It almost has some of the qualities of a calling for some people. It just is something that people love and feel compelled to do. So that's kind of more about the freelancers. We ultimately would love to have and will need to have paid editors. So our big goal is, over the next few years, is to get to a financially stable position where that can happen. Volunteers are wonderful, but for stability, we need paid folks and to turn things over to.
Sure. So my understanding of the new infrastructure bill that Congress just passed, that there's some tax credits for local newspapers, and it might be tied to the number of reporters in it. Are there any implications for the Salish Current, things that you can look to from that infrastructure bill to help out your position?
It doesn't really look like it targets nonprofits that have volunteer and freelance staffing. No, the biggest benefit for nonprofits in general, I think, would be the payroll tax aspects, but. For the most part, it's great to think about for future. It's great to think about, in general, for the good of the community.
Right. Okay. So Ron, for Cascadia Daily News, are there ideas about how to harness some of that infrastructure bill for your purposes? And I'd also love to know more about some of the people you plan to bring on your staff. We know, as you mentioned, there's some fine local journalists, reporters, and photojournalists in the community. We're wondering if there are some familiar names already working behind the scenes, anybody that we might know.
Yes, we actually have Marty Barron coming in to replace me no, just kidding. Less familiar than that, maybe. I want to back up one step quickly. The infrastructure bill would have immediate benefit to organizations and companies like ours. And I think, based on what Maria Cantwell's original intent was for this, we're the kind of organization that the legislation is trying to encourage and support people to come forward in their communities and launch new ventures, of various funding types, but that employ full-time working professional journalists. And we're trying, one of the standards we established right away was to pay people a fair living wage to live in Bellingham. And that's more than most of the newspaper chains pay. And we're providing them with full benefits. And so, yes, that infrastructure legislation would benefit us substantially. And I would look at it, if it passed, as an opportunity for us to grow more quickly than we probably will otherwise, waiting for the community to support us through subscriptions. Our staff, I'm so excited about our staff. I mean, I've been in newspaper journalism for 35 years plus, started when I was 5. And I've never been more excited about anything than the staff that we have put together. We have a combination of a couple probably pretty well-known local veteran people. Our local government reporter is going to be Ralph Schwartz, who has experience here, both at the Herald and the Skagit paper and the Current recently. And he's very plugged in, and it's been hard to keep him from starting work before his hire date, which starts in 2 weeks. Our arts and entertainment editor will be Amy Kepferle, who's coming over from Cascadia Weekly and is an institution here in that field. And we have added a couple of other people from more far afield. We've hired an environment and natural resources reporter from the Nome Nugget, who's a young person who has strong investigative skills and a master's degree in investigative journalism. I've hired a super talented photographer from Astoria, Haley Hoffman, who's a photojournalist in the truest sense, in that she's a really strong words reporter, but just a really incredibly talented photographer who can tell stories through photos and show us the news rather than just tell us the news, for people who like to get their news that way. Haley Palmer, our sports editor, established herself as kind of the owner of that beat in this county in Linden. She's come to work for us. I'm leaving people out, but we have a super talented staff, and very much to a person committed to this new enterprise and excited about the chance to start something from scratch, right? This doesn't really ever happen in journalism. I've never seen it happen. I've never been involved in it before. It's a blank slate where we've been told, create a product here. And I've told every person who comes in the door, think about the way you did your job in the past, sweep that aside and tell me, how would you do it if you could start over? And of course, there are limitations to that. But a lot of the ideas that I heard when we asked that question have been incorporated into how we're going to approach the news. And I'm excited about that, because I think we have a really cool mix of veteran people and young people. And I mentioned interns earlier. We have 3 interns working for us right now who are all enthused and out working on stories that will appear once we start publishing. We plan to have a staff of interns pretty much all the time. And it's important to us to provide these kind of first jobs to people who we see entering the field. And they're brave people to be going into journalism in the current environment, right? The industry's shaky. People see them as the enemy, but they're here. And it's hard for them to get started. And I plan to absolutely take probably what many people would consider some risk in hiring people who don't have professional experience, but I can see the talent that they bring. That's an important part of our mission, I think, and part of our ethic as a business is that we want to provide those opportunities to get the next generation of journalists started and out on the street and supported in a way that they can do their job without living on food stamps, or the way that a lot of people who are these passionate, sort of heroic people in the field and other places working for newspaper chains, it's criminal that they have to live that way, and they shouldn't have to. And we're trying to do something about that.
Great. So, Amy, when you were conceptualizing Salish Current, you too got to make some choices about starting fresh and how you wanted to do things. Does the Salish Current choose to have editorial content, and why or why not?
We do. We have occasional editorials, but we haven't gone very heavily in that direction because we're working really hard on information at this point, and getting those stories out about what's happening in the community. Over time, that probably will develop more. We have enjoyed seeing the comments come in the Community Voices column from people in the community, and that's actually been quite gratifying in a way, because there seems to be no other way for people to talk about some of these important things from their perspectives. So we will certainly get there.
Gotcha. And Ron, I noticed that the Cascadia Daily website says that you do intend to have an editorial page and some opinion pieces written by editorial staff, as well as guest commentaries and letters to the editor. What's your approach about it, and why do you think it's important for Cascadia Daily News to offer the editorials?
Yeah, I'm going to write a regular column for our editorial page. That's my perspective on things as a local, longtime resident and a longtime journalist. It is only my perspective. It's not a company perspective. It's not an unsigned, august newspaper editorial. It's my column. And I'm going to work really hard to solicit and publish other guest opinion columns from in all walks of life in the community. And we hope to have an active letters section. We will have some syndicated columnists too, to talk about national issues that are of local interest. We are recruiting as many local voices as we can to have regular appearances in our paper who talk about things of their own expertise. And a lot of those are not really opinion columns, but they're sort of public service columns about books and restaurants and microbrews and, on down the list of things that people do, the outdoors, travel, all of those things. We hope to generate community content that way. But I feel like the editorial voice is critical. And it's what is missing in the media landscape here. Honestly, I've seen throughout my careers, and I've done some investigative work and covered organizations and institutions that it quickly becomes clear that have kind of lived on their own without any kind of watchdog journalism hovering over their heads for a long time, and they behave differently. I don't want to mention any names, but like the National Park Service or certain private institutions in healthcare, they're not used to being questioned by reporters. And honestly, I've heard this from some of my reporters just in the early work that we've been doing. They've been calling around talking to public officials who basically are annoyed that they're being bothered by a reporter. Like, why are you calling me? Who are you? What's your little newspaper thing here? And a lot of times I see reporters around here do stories and they'll talk to somebody from one of these institutions and the person will just say, no, we're not going to give you that. And we're not going to answer that question. Well, that's not good enough for us. It isn't. It's not good enough for the public. And that's what's missing. And what's missing is solid reporting to bring out those kind of answers. And then an editorial voice that steps in behind it and said, this is wrong. It's not good enough to just say no to the media when the media is trying to represent the broader community. And that's going to take some time. People are not used to that. It'll probably make people upset that we're taking an editorial position on something, but it's necessary. I mean, sometimes this stuff just needs to be called out, and we're going to try to do that, not just in our own way, but with other voices, and provide that kind of accountability, which I think is really missing here in a lot of ways. And what I hear from readers already who are sending stuff to our tip line, news tips at cascadiadaily.com, is that they see this. They see it in the places they work. They see it in their public servants. They see a need for public exposure and accountability. And, I don't say that just to say, oh, we're going to come out and like berate people or beat up on people. But one of the things that we're trying to sell as a news organization here is hope, right? We're in a time where people, I think, feel hopeless in a lot of ways. And the way that you bring hope to people through news is that you show things that are working. You show people that are doing great works. You show things that are going on in our schools and things that kids are doing that have been missing from the public square forever. But you also expose problems, right? We all know these problems are out there. They need to be acknowledged before they can be solved. And through action to solve problems comes hope. And I think that people need to see that there is a process there and a chain that still works. And I think that media is a critical part of that. And we hope to sort of reestablish some of that linkage.
Great. I've got one more question for both of you before we jump into some of the Q&A. I know the questions are piling up there, but before we do that, Amy, I'm curious about what some of the topics are that Salish Current has covered in its first year or so that you think would not have been told otherwise.
That's an interesting point. I would say 90% of what we've done would be the quick answer. In the last few weeks, we've had another article about homelessness. This one tied in the Monroe Institute at Western's Monroe seminar. And I have never seen that covered before. That we're having one that talks about the drug addiction side that the seminar covered. I see the Nooksack Tribe's climate change program. The depth that our reporter went into on that was certainly not something that we'd seen before. We've done a number of social justice pieces about policing problems. We had a really, really busy summer in 2020 with COVID and with the Black Lives Matter rallies. And those, while you get photos and a Twitter feed, we went into a lot more depth and talked to people who are actually activists working for those efforts. The water rights pieces that I mentioned too have been covered somewhat, but not in the depth that we've done. We also have a piece coming up in the next couple of weeks on what people are saying about why they are looking for religious exemptions from the COVID-19 vaccine. That sort of look at, what are people talking about? How does this affect them? How does it play out in their lives? Are the sort of stories that we have brought that haven't been there.
Super. And Ron, what are some of the stories you think our community would benefit from learning more about? What's been missed?
It's it's a long list. And first of all, I want to commend Amy for that work that she mentioned that they've done. I think it's been really important, and it's very encouraging to see that come out as a citizen and as a journalist. I think it's been a welcome change to the landscape here. We see a lot of the same issues, right? The challenge for us is going to be keeping up with that list of things that need to be done, less than coming up with ideas. And that's why we're looking at approaching a lot of these stories in a unique way with reporters that have some sort of traditional beats or areas of coverage the way that news organizations used to, but look more towards topical coverage of things that affect everybody. And social issues that Amy just mentioned are high in that list, and so is growth and change. Right, this place is a climate refuge, and it's going to be increasingly one. And how are we going to live with that? Are we going to build walls around the town or the county or the region? No. So those are all the kind of questions we want our stories to get at and answer and help guide people through that process. I mean, one of the things I've seen, we talked about covering the region, but I'm thinking specifically in Bellingham, Whatcom County, and this is true of other places in the country too, when the traditional watchdog role of the newspaper is diminished the way that it has been here, you don't get the kind of contextual reporting that gives people advance notice of issues that are coming before public bodies. We hope to bring those out a lot more to encourage people to be able to be part of the process. What I've seen for far too long here is, since we have this news vacuum, people who are political activists on both sides of the political equation here have used that to their advantage, because they have their own communications channels that reach specifically to their people with their message, and they get out and influence what's going on in the community. And I feel like there's a missing sort of center non-activist person voice here that's really fallen off the radar screen of a lot of our politics. And we're going to try to do stories that bring that back to the fore and give people more of a voice. I mean, I think we have to be really energetic about that. One of the things that I hope will be one of our hallmarks will be that we listen to people and what they want to know about, but I don't see that as just a passive activity where we open our doors and we open our inbox and say, tell us what you want to know. I think we need to reach out to people and be active about asking them, are we doing what needs to be done here? How can we do it better? That's part of our mission, and we're in the process right now of just sort of crowdsourcing a lot of those issues and figuring out exactly where we go first.
Got it. Well, I can see Maureen McCarthy is with us now to look through the Q&A and share some of our audience questions with you both.
All right, let's see. The first one is for you, Ron. There have been quite a few questions about local sports. And I know you mentioned and named that you have a sports editor online, which is great. So I believe this question may just be for Ron, but Amy, I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong after he's finished. What can you tell us about coverage of local sports? And will you also cover Western Washington University's athletics?
Yes, absolutely. We will cover Western. We intend to become the leading source for information about prep sports, and not just prep sports. This is a prep sports praised county, and it's amazing to me that it has fallen off the map for coverage in local news. It's like there are certain things that are obvious that you cover if you're going to try to be a paper record, and one of those is everybody's kids' sports activities, because that's a natural recurring audience. So that was one of the things that we jumped on early, and we've even started, giving little cheat peeks at what we're going to do through an email newsletter that can be signed up for at our website right now. We have a really, really talented and passionate sports editor reporter, Haley Palmer. I just this morning edited a little bio of her that's going to run on our website soon. And I mentioned that during the pandemic, I watched as everything changed and everything went into emergency modes. And it was interesting to watch different journalists adjust their work, right? And some of their work went away, like sports were shut down. And I saw Haley Palmer almost every week on Twitter talking about how much she missed being out in the bleachers amongst all these fans. And it was obvious it was killing her, right? To not be able to do this. And so I said, I want her. If we started a newspaper, I want her. And we did, and I hired her. And it's that kind of passion I think people will see. We plan to cover Western as much as we can. Obvious big story right in our community, college sports that we're not being covered by anybody. But we also plan to cover recreational sports. This is a hugely active community. There are a lot of people who are into rowing and sculling and kayaking, and not just on a sort of activity basis, but on a competitive basis. And we plan to work a lot of that coverage also into our sports section, which will be an actual section. And I want to emphasize too that our photographers are geared towards making great sports photos, and people love great sports photos. And we're going to work really hard at that.
Fantastic. Amy, anything to add on sports?
We actually did cover the lack of sports in an interesting way. That is, covering sports during COVID. It was a big deal. As I think sports, what did we say? We said prep wild, prep crazy, maybe sports in our area. And it was difficult for people to not be in the bleachers. And then there was a time when the players were on the field, but there was nobody in the stands to speak of. So it's been a really hard thing for an activity that really brings people together and is a passion for so many. So our approach is not to cover games, but certainly to cover trends and that sort of thing.
All right. We've also had a couple of questions about veteran reporters, and I know Ron mentioned a couple that are on his staff. Amy, for those who maybe haven't read the Salish Current, can you think of a few other folks that are writing for you that people might be interested to know and follow?
Yes, we did have some pieces from Ralph Schwartz, which was lovely, and I'm looking forward to reading more of him. Really glad we're going to be able to do that. Matt Benoit is probably a name who's familiar to a lot of readers. He's done a lot of freelancing in this area and is one of our regulars and has been since the beginning. Also, Kimberly Covell, who has a day job down in Mount Vernon and is able to write about things that happen up north of the county line here for us. Jackie Ellison, who's been there, has done some things for us as well. And they're the most experienced writers who have worked with us.
Fantastic. And Ron, just in case you thought of any others, but I know you mentioned after your list, you may have forgotten. If I'll give you a chance if you have thought of any more.
No, we have, the ones I mentioned are kind of the core of our experienced staff. But I would like to mention that we have another local veteran photographer coming on staff, in addition to our current photographer, Haley Hoffman, Andy Bronson, who a lot of people might recognized from the community and working at the Bellingham Herald and being a great sports and general assignment shooter is moving to us from his current job at the Everett Herald. And so we're very excited about our photographic capabilities.
Great, great. Do either of your publications have reporters who are people of color?
We have our managing editor, who's a person of color, yes.
Yeah, we have one reporter who is a person of color, and a challenge for the industry that I'm keenly plugged into is finding people for leadership positions who are people of color in journalism. And there's, at least one and maybe two positions on our staff right now that I'm kind of waiting on, because I want to find the right people for those jobs who represent our community and the broader community in that way. And I think it's critical, and it's a difficult. I've seen publications that have great means and abilities struggle with that issue, and it's something that we're very, very keenly aware of and concerned about.
Okay, this is something that each of you have touched on in different ways, but it's still such a good question, so I'm going to ask it. Do people trust the news media, and why or why not?
Oh, I'd love to answer that, because we're having noticed that trust, as a trusted institution, journalism falls way behind many others. And we're pretty excited about an opportunity that we're going to have to work with the UW Center for an Informed Public and a library consortium called OCLC in a project that will engage us with other local journalists and educators and librarians here in talking about trust, because there's so much, and I saw another question in the chat that sort of touched on this. There's so much that is called journalism that is not journalism. There have been bad behaviors on the part of people calling themselves journalists, and trust has really eroded over the last, I would say since the Reagan era. Actually, is when you see it starting. It's a big problem. That's one of the reasons why we have posted on our website that we follow the Society for Professional Journalists ethics rules. We put them up there. We all of our reporters sign a letter of agreement that talks about ethics, because that's where it starts, is taking responsibility for what you're putting up there. But there's also that matter of engaging with the community. And so this project that I mentioned is actually called Understanding Trust. And I'm just very excited to see how it plays out, because it will engage a lot of people in the dialogue about why don't we trust you? Why should we trust you? How can we trust you? All those kinds of things, because journalism should exist for the benefit of the public, of true public service.
Ron?
I think, yeah, I would echo what Amy said. And I think, my addition to that would be that trust is earned. I don't expect anybody to trust us prima facie coming out of the gate with this new paper. I can sit here for as long as I have time and bandwidth for and say, I'm the person who makes all these decisions here, and we have a process for everything, and trust us on this, trust us on that. Well, they're gonna have to see it, right? So I tell people, see what we do, judge us on our work. We have spent a lot of time and thought, myself and a couple other people in the last 2 months, and forging what we consider a very forward-looking news mission statement, and not code of ethics, but ethics guidelines, because we think those two things go together, what we're about as a news organization. And that will hit on points that are not traditional things you'll see in ethics policies. Like, we do not see every story as an equal contest between 2 points of view. If one of them is demonstrably false, we will call it that. We won't knowingly contribute false information into the public information stream. If people can't handle that, then they're not in our audience. We don't see everything as an equal either or kind of thing. And we hope to do the additional reporting and work that's required on a daily story by story basis to make that distinction very clear. And we think that, and we hope that will make people trust us in looking towards finding objectivity is a mythical goal that can't be met because we're all people. We all have our opinions, but we hope to be ultra transparent in what we do. And that's why we plan to publish that statement and had put it out there for everybody, saying, here's our approach to news. This is what is our guiding set of principles. This is how we expect our staff to behave in relation to that. And we think it's very forward looking, and we're proud of it, and we're happy to share it with people as soon as it's polished and finished shortly.
Okay, super important question that I've gotten more than once. What about comics?
We have comics. We are bringing some comics from the Cascadia Weekly into the new paper, and we will also be subscribing to a syndicate that will provide comics. And I'm working on some ways to solicit local editorial cartoons, which I think are really almost lost art, but a great one, and a tradition that we'd like to continue in our paper.
Any comics for you in the Salish Current, Amy?
Boy, that would be fun. I'm working on my sketching skills. So
Okay.
we'll see how it goes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. And this is my last audience question. And that is, what news organizations do each of you most admire? And what is it about them that puts them on the top of your list?
I have to share what a couple of people who I talked with who have a very different political perspectives from mine. We pooled our ideas, and we trusted and didn't trust the same ones. The ones who ended up trusting are NPR and BBC News. And I would add to my list also Civil Beat in Honolulu. That's another nonprofit that has just been incredibly successful. They've been around 10 or 11 years and have, I think they're up to over 25, almost 30 people in the newsroom, and just doing a great job there. Another one closer to home is Crosscut. They do a fantastic job of covering really important issues really well in our area. I do admire the Seattle Times and the Washington Post and the New York Times for all their good points.
Those are really good choices. I do read a lot of those. In fact, I read not all of them, but most of those on a regular basis on my laptop. My bias, and it's a clear bias, is I worked for 33 years at the Seattle Times, and I think it's a good newspaper. It's had its ups and downs like other metro dailies, and it's struggled, but it has settled on a business model that's working right now. And some of that, I'll be honest, is inspiring what I'm trying to do with our paper. And it's a model that's working and has served the Seattle community for a long time in a way that distinctly, markedly different similar newspapers owned by chains have not. And so to me, that's an inspiration and something that we're going to try to sort of not directly replicate, but inspire what we do here in terms of our just general structure and attitude and approach to news.
If I could just add, I also, since I grew up with in a weekly newspaper family, my dad published a weekly newspaper, I have to remember to give a shout out to the Northern Light and the Linden Tribune in particular. I think they're quite outstanding, and it's marvelous that they're still there serving their communities.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yes.
Terrific.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've got some time for a quick lightning round here of some quick questions, just to finish off with a little bit of energy here. I'm glad you're getting a sip of water, ready to go. Let's start with you, Ron. What are the top 3 local people you'd like to interview for your news organization?
Top 3 local people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got an email message this morning from the spokesperson for Rick Larson, and asking some questions about our publication. And I wouldn't mind getting Rick on the phone to tell me what exactly is going on in Washington, D.C. right now. That'd be a first one. I plan to actually reach out to all these people, the mayor, the county executive, the sheriff, and other people, to sit down and tell them what we're about and ask what they see as a need for journalism in our community. And I'm going to invite some of those people to write for us, put those thoughts in writing. that's a scary thing for a lot of people, but I'll see if I can talk them into it. So yeah, newsmakers, but I spent some time on Monday with the committee of the League of Women Voters for an hour and a half or an hour plus on Zoom. And I got more insight into the workings of this community from that group than I'll ever get from elected officials who are on the record. And so there's a strong lesson for me there that these are the people who know what's going on in this community and what needs to happen. And I plan to spend a lot of time reaching out to those kind of groups.
Excellent. Amy, your top 3 local people you'd like to interview or have people interview for the Salish Current?
Wow, it gets to be more than 3 really quickly. One person I'd like to interview would be Vernon Damani Johnson, who stepped down as the director of the Monroe Institute. I think that he would have some fabulous perspectives as a political science professor and someone active in our community in so many ways. I'd love to sit down with him. At the same time, another storyteller I would like to talk to would be Daryl Hilaire of the Lummi tribe. He's got that fantastic Children of the Setting Sun Productions company. And it might be really interesting to find out what stories didn't get in the video, because they just do an amazing amount of coverage of all different kinds of areas. And the third one, wow. I think there's an opportunity to learn a lot more about agriculture. And we've been talking with a few farmers in the Linden area about their experiences. And there's actually one woman who we're going to hear from who is a farmer and is going to talk about some things. So we'll get to hear from her, but that would be my list.
Great. So expanding a bit, Ron, what local story would you like your paper to get the scoop on?
Well, I'm not going to say, but for obvious reasons. By the way, I think local news competition is such a great thing. Honestly, I want to celebrate that and the fact that we're talking about this here. This doesn't happen in most communities in America today. I mean, there are not competitive news situations in towns our size. And I think that's something that people should feel really good about, right? It shows that there's not only a need for it here, but a demand for it, or we wouldn't all be doing this just for fun in the long hours. I think that's just such a cool thing. But back to your question that I'm trying to avoid here. I have a goal of coming up with a list of 10 enterprise stories that we're going to roll out in our first month of publication. They're going to make people go, wow, look at this. And those can be anything from profiles about really fascinating people in our community. I feel that's such a huge underserved need here is profiles of people and just what they're doing to make differences in people's lives on a daily basis. I want to bring some of those in. I want to bring in a couple of really good stories from the arts and entertainment world. And I have our news reporters who cover local government champing at the bit to do enterprise work about local government bodies. And we're already getting news tips from people about stories there. And so I guess I can say you'll know them when you see them.
Gotcha. Amy, anything for Salish Current?
The story that I would like to break would be something along the lines of a Pulitzer Prize for a novelist in our area who no one had heard of before.
Excellent. That would be wonderful.
Do you know something about that, Amy?
I have no comment. No comment.
Okay.
Intriguing. Yeah.
She's neither confirming nor denying that she knows.
None of those. No.
Not on the record. Okay, got it. I am interested in knowing how you'll be staying up on coverage of topics around Whatcom County, not just specifically Bellingham. Amy, since you've been doing this at Salish Current for a while, what's your approach to that?
It helps to have an in-house news junkie, someone who is just continually reading all the time. And the more of those you have, the better it is, because there is so much information out there, so many different sources. So it requires diligence.
Gotcha. Ron, how about you? Will you be able to cast your net to getting some of those important stories countywide, or is your focus mostly Bellingham?
No, it's not Bellingham. It is a difficult thing, right? Because you only have so many people and you only be in so many places at once, and keep track of so many local governments, right? This stuff pops up in front of local governments, and the Current does a great job of putting out a civic agenda about what's coming up in a lot of different places. That's really valuable. And so we look at things like that. But in our particular case, I'm urging our reporters to think regionally about most of their stories. And there's a lot of stories that come before the Bellingham City Council, the Port of Bellingham, especially the Whatcom County Council, that affect everybody in the county, and some of them affect people way beyond in ways more impactful in the outlying areas than in the city itself, because it has its own very active government. And so I'm going to be telling and coaching and urging our environmental natural resources person to be strongly focused in the county on things like agriculture. Amy mentioned water rights, which is a huge story here, and it's a national story, honestly, that's unfolding here that hasn't been given the kind of continuing coverage that it deserves. So those kinds of stories we will look at to try to tell on a regional basis as much as possible, because it's a two-way thing. And not only do those outlying communities need to be served by our journalism, but they're interested in knowing what goes on in Bellingham and how it affects them, because we all are in the same pond here, and everything's connected. And so we're trying to build that into the beat structures and everything we do. And like I said earlier, the fact that we don't have people coming into jobs that have been traditionally, if you're the Port of Bellingham reporter, you do this, or if you're the city reporter, you do this. It's a blank slate. And so we're trying to recreate those beats in a way that are more regionally focused.
So speaking of ponds and maybe Sumas Lake, that makes me think about Canada and the border. Does Salish Current ever cover issues related to things in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, Gulf Islands?
We include those kinds of things in stories like the Roberts Bank shipping plan. There's a plan to build a huge port up there, and it crosses right through traditional Lummi fishing area. So that's a big deal. So things like that, absolutely, we're on. But it's when you think about what our geographical area really is, certainly Lower British Columbia is a part of that.
And Cascadia Daily News, also some Canadian coverage.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Cascadia definitely includes BC. So it's part of our home waters, like everything else. And so, and it's remarkable to me, the lack of coverage, even on the big metro dailies, have done just a terrible job of covering basic BC issues, environmental issues, political issues. I mean, our population is really ignorant of what goes on in Canada, which is crazy because it's 22 miles away. And there's this artificial ditch line in between us that blocks so much discourse and information, because I think media have largely failed to jump over that line and just and talk about those issues. And some of these came up during the pandemic, right? All of a sudden, we had people on both sides of that line who were family members separated by that ditch, and suddenly you realize how remarkably important that political differentiation is. And it reminded me in a big way of how we need to cast a focus more on BC and all of our issues, not just economic issues, but political issues and social issues. I mean, we have a lot of people who live on both sides of that line, and absolutely one of the things I'd like to spend time on, you asked big stories that we'll be working on in the coming years, is just the federal presence in Whatcom County that sprung up out of the ground after 9/11 and is like a not small, but significant force of people. And I want to know what all those people are doing, and what does that cost us? And is it necessary, or is it enough? I mean, all these questions, like, we need to ask those questions, and we need to demand answers, and not settle for, we'll get back to you on that. It's always tough reporting on the federal government, and that's why I've specifically hired people with expertise on federal records requests and a lot of that sort of shoe leather digging kind of journalism that will get answers to those questions.
Great. Well, I have many more questions I could ask, but unfortunately we are out of time this afternoon. I want to thank you both, Amy Nelson from Salish Current, Ron Judd from Cascadia Daily News. Thanks so much for being with us here today at City Club. And I, again, thank you very much for all your responses. And I look forward to reading more of what your reporters are putting forth. Thank you both.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.